Tonight, as we approach yet another international crisis created by Vladimir Putin, we are joined by Evelyn Farkas, a senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund and a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia. She is an MSNBC national security analyst. Evelyn, troops forming on a Russian border area with Georgia. We've seen this before.
Right. This is Vladimir Putin showing the world and showing his neighbors in particular that he's still the man, if you will, that Russia's still a great power and that Russia has a lot of cards. It's also, I think, a little bit of a finger in the face to the West, so Western Europe, the G7, our president, you know, saying, hey, I can still cause a lot of trouble. Don't think about expanding NATO. Georgia's still on the list. They still want to become a NATO member. And the original invasion of Georgia, if you remember, in 2008, came about because the Georgians were offered a conditional membership by NATO. And actually, George Bush, our president at the time, was pushing it really hard. It was Georgia and Ukraine. It didn't come to pass because the Russians invaded, and they continue to occupy 20% of Georgia's territory. But this is a very dangerous situation, and unfortunately, it's yet again, I would say, a G7 failure, because they should have been talking about Ukraine and Georgia and all of the things that Russia's doing wrong, rather than even having to discuss the possibility of re-inviting Russia into the G7.
Yeah, President Trump had them basically wasting their time on a discussion. And then Vladimir Putin, to show his gratitude for how hard Donald Trump worked for him at the G7, trying to get him back in the group, he does this. You mentioned the first incursion into Georgia. Let's listen to what Republican presidential candidate John McCain had to say about that then, and just imagine what has happened to Republicanism since John McCain said this and where Donald Trump is now. Let's listen to this.
I know from speaking this morning to the president of Georgia, Misha Saakashvili, who I have known for many years, that he knows that the thoughts and the prayers and support of the American people are with that brave little nation as they struggle today for their freedom and independence. I know I speak for every American when I say to him, today, we are all Georgians.
It's so hard to watch that with John McCain gone and Donald Trump now in the place where John McCain wanted to be. That didn't have to be written for him. Not one word of that had to be put in his mind for that. He was ready for that kind of, how to deal with that kind of crisis. What should this president be doing now?
Well, he should be ideally doing what John McCain is doing. This is not a democracy. This is a country that's trying to reestablish a sphere of influence. It's trying to bully Georgia, of course. There's also the situation in Ukraine, which we need to keep a very close eye on. Now, maybe they've made some progress, but nevertheless, I mean, Vladimir Putin's agenda is all about creating a sphere of influence, getting his way with the neighboring countries, weakening them politically. And so this is, again, unfortunately, John McCain understood we have to fight against the bullies. We have to fight against autocracy. The Georgians established a democracy. It was a really big deal. And John McCain was actually there at the very beginning, heavily involved when most people didn't know there was a Republic of Georgia. We just thought there was the state of Georgia. And so he understood clearly what happened. In 2008, when we said, Georgia, come into NATO, we didn't realize that the Russians would have the reaction that they would have. Now we know that they'll use military force to prevent sovereign countries from joining associations that their people want them to join. That should be unacceptable. So the West needs to jump in right now, Lawrence. I mean, our government should be leading the way to put an end to this aggression.
Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.